Good afternoon, everyone. We are kicking off the seminar series from Portland State University or Portland Technology Management School of Thought, as cited in a recent published paper. And these lectures are also used for class purposes at Portland State University. So we have students as well as professionals alike on this call. So today's speaker is Dr. Momtaj Khanam, who recently got her PhD in technology management at Portland State University. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Momtaj to start her presentation. Go ahead, Momtaj.
Thank you, Dr. Daim, for inviting me as a guest speaker. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this seminar. So let me get started. The title of my research is a market diffusion potential assessment model for residential energy efficient technologies in the US. So the agenda consists of sections that explains different aspects of the research and answers some of the basic questions about the research. For example, why the research is important, the theoretical and conceptual background, the gap analysis, how the gap is addressed, what methodology is adopted, and finally, the theoretical and practical contribution of the research. To start with, I would like to clarify the different terminologies used in the dissertation title so that the subsequent parts in this presentation become more understandable. So what do the different terms imply? To start with, I will start with energy efficient technology, which is the main focus of the study. The technical definition is having the same or better level of service at the expense of less energy consumption. The interesting fact is that each new energy efficient technology outperforms its predecessors in efficiency standard and paves the way for greater savings in energy in the long run. Now, the scope of the research is residential buildings. The reason is that residential buildings account for about 21% of the total energy consumption in the US, which is equivalent to 21.5 quadrillion British thermal unit. Studies have predicted that it is possible to save almost 40 to 50% energy by diffusion of advanced energy efficient technologies in the US. Next, as mentioned in the title of the research, which measures diffusion potential. So here we have used the term diffusion instead of adoption. So we know that the term adoption and diffusion, they are used interchangeably, but for this research, a distinction is made based on the fact that adoption is from the consumer's perspective, while diffusion is from the market's perspective. With respect to data collection, this research uses assessment rather than interview, field study, or survey, as the research intends to measure elements that cannot be enumerated. Finally, the term market diffusion potential. So the term is used as a metric that helps to compare relative diffusion status of technologies in similar applications. So the research is on diffusion of energy efficient technologies. So the question is, if there is a difference between diffusion of energy efficient technologies and other technologies. And the next slide discusses about diffusion of energy efficient technologies. In fact, there is a difference between the diffusion of energy efficient technology and other technologies in the sense that energy efficient technologies are unique as it needs to surmount two chasms unlike other technology products. Because besides having to cross the initial chasm for transition from characterization to deployment phase, it also needs to bridge the gap between its commercial introduction and large-scale utility program adoption. The reason is that due to higher upfront cost of energy efficient technologies, consumers are reluctant to adopt these technologies in residences, and therefore utility programs help to cross the chasm created by perceived risk or lack of reward. Now, what's the benefit of saving energy by adopting efficient technologies in the building? The next slide sheds light on that. So as mentioned earlier, residential buildings account for about 21.5 quadrillion British thermal units. A single energy efficient appliance in a residential building goes a long way in saving energy globally. So this is something like which resonates with Neil Armstrong's famous quote that a small step for man and a giant leap for mankind. So diffusion of energy efficient technology benefits individual consumers, which is a microeconomic benefit in the form of saving utility bills. Uh, it also provides mesoeconomic benefits, which is the benefit enjoyed by sectors. For example, it rescues utility from building new generation, transmission or distribution plants. And finally, it also offers macroeconomic benefits, which is meant for the market, society, as well as for the world community in the form of reduced carbon dioxide emission or impeding the global climate change. So in the next few slides, I will explain the path of the research and clarify that the research is firmly grounded on theoretical constructs by sharing some of the existing theories in the field of inquiry related to this research. So the first theory is about the FAB model, which is a widely used rubric to understand what an innovation renders, how it works, and what makes the users want it. The different elements of the FAB model correspond to different levels of advantage perceived by various actors as we move from producers, suppliers, and entities who affect business environment to deliver the product to ultimate adopters. The FAB model is used in this research to identify the most important market attributes that helps to increase the diffusion of energy efficient technologies in the US. The next theory is the customer value hierarchy, which explains how to create customer value that helps diffusion. Combination of product, service, characteristics, or bundle attributes provide benefits to customers. Benefits that is offered in product or service is considered as customer value when it saves time and money, or it helps to earn more money, or helps people to become happier or healthier or more productive. The customer hierarchy model help to identify the different key elements that help to develop the market attributes, which are the elements that will increase the diffusion, most important elements. So another important concept which is relevant to the current study is the energy efficiency market system. So energy efficiency market consists of supply and demand side actors who have interrelationship. Supply side actors could be manufacturers, suppliers of components, enabling technology and technical assistance, energy standards, or it could be incentive programs, or training and necessary services to successfully deliver the product to the adopters. The demand side actors are the consumers, who could be individuals, they could be business, or they could be government entities. In other ways, we can also classify the actors as direct players, who could be the producers and manufacturers, the support service providers like the suppliers, business extension service, and also the business environment enablers like the regulatory agencies, business corporations, infrastructure. The model is developed to ensure that different important players in the market also get benefited when the diffusion of energy efficiency technologies is increased, or accelerated. So based on the relevant theories discussed in the previous slides, a conceptual framework is created, which will be shown in the next slide. This is a visual presentation of how different components in this study is understood and how they are perceived to be related. It is named as the Fishbone Cockwell diagram, as it is similar to a fishbone diagram with the diffusion at the head of the fish, and is driven by the contributed factors shown by the wheels. And as each factor is dependent on the other or drives one another to increase the diffusion of energy efficient technologies, that's why it's also called the Cockwell diagram. The next section of the presentation identifies the different issues that impede the diffusion of energy efficient technologies. So there are many factors which affect the diffusion of energy efficient technologies, but some of the most pronounced, the three most pronounced problems are difference between expected and actual diffusion. Knowing how far the diffusion is from expected helps to take appropriate action. The second problem is about impact of different drivers and barriers. To increase diffusion, we need to know the relative impact of drivers and barriers. The third problem is about different steps or actions adopted to increase the diffusion. In most cases, the actions are basically suggestions or expert opinions rather than measures. The word measures is a homonym of, or it has multiple meaning. In the current study, measures are considered as deliberate actions that are quantifiable. So we do not know to what extent the different actions impact diffusion. So we have identified three problems, three issues related to the diffusion of energy efficient technologies. So even if these are three different issues, we can find one common factor for all of this, which is a proper measuring technique. And as Lord Kelvin said, what cannot be measured cannot be improved. So the next three slides summarize the findings from literature and identifies the gap. So keeping the three major issues that I have just shared, so three broad categories of literature has been reviewed. The first group of literature is on how diffusion is measured. As mentioned earlier, adoption and diffusion are two different terms that are used interchangeably. Adoption takes the stand of the consumers, while diffusion sees through the lens of market and the society. So we can say that adoption is the decision, for example, the acceptance or rejection, and then subsequent implementation or discontinuance or modification by an individual or organization, while diffusion is the propagation of the innovation through different avenues to adopters. We can say that adoption is an individual process that leads to diffusion as a systematic process. The second group of literature focuses on different models that identify factors of diffusion. It is found that most of the research either identified determinants of different energy efficient technologies in the form of listing drivers or barriers, or rank the different drivers and the barriers separately. So there is a lack of studies that analyze the collective impact of these opposing factors on diffusion of residential energy efficient technologies. The third set of literature is based on what actions are recommended for increasing the diffusion of energy efficient technologies. Different activities, different actions that are recommended, or the initiatives that are planned, are mostly based on expert opinion, which are subjective, and fails to consider the market status for taking appropriate measures that are objective. So as I mentioned earlier, measures are deliberate actions that are quantifiable, that can be measured. The next slide explains the objective and sub-objective. So the objective of the research is formulated based on the problem identified and review of relevant literatures. So it is to develop a market diffusion potential assessment model for residential energy efficient technologies in the US. And the sub-objectives are specific aspects of the research that actually within the main framework of the study, we can say that sub-objectives are intended to operationalize the different components for assessing or measuring the market diffusion potential. The next section explains the research question. The research questions are generated based on the research gaps identified in literature review and objective. The three research questions that are shown in this slide are answered through this research. The next few slides elaborate the research methodology and various tools and models that are used in the study. So based on the nature of the problem, a multi-criteria decision model is used, as it's easy to simplify the relationship among elements by allowing them to be partitioned into different levels or hierarchy. So in a multi-criteria decision model, in the hierarchy, each successive level from top towards bottom dissociates into more detailed elements that defines the contents linked to the elements above. So that's the basic idea in a multi-criteria decision model. In the next slide, the different phases of the research and the tasks and objectives achieved in this different steps would be discussed. So the research is conducted in three phases. So a hybrid multi-criteria decision model is used. So according to the classification of multi-criteria decision model, If other tools are used along with multi-criteria decision model, then it's called a hybrid MCDM or multi-criteria decision model. For this study, desirability curves has been used to compare technologies besides the hierarchical decision model. Hence, it is considered to be a hybrid MCDM. The first phase is weighting. So it's ranking the criteria and identifying the different criteria and sub-criteria and then ranking them and identifying the relative impact of the criteria and sub-criteria towards the objective. Desirability curves or functions are used to determine percent diffusion over the range of metrics specified for each key elements in the model pertaining to a certain market attribute. So this will become more understandable with the model that would be discussed in a little while. Second phase is the amalgamation, where desirability curves are developed and the market diffusion potential is calculated for different technology cases by aggregating all the values of key elements and market attributes. Scenario analysis is carried out to identify the extent of change in scores or relative weights or diffusion among different technology cases and how the different elements affect the level of market diffusion potential of the technology cases. So the model that has been used in this study is the hierarchical decision model, which was developed by Dr. Cockwell. The different steps in developing this model would be discussed in the next few slides. So a major part of the current study is dependent on experts' knowledge, expertise, experience, and individuality to assess the elements that cannot be otherwise quantified. Various tools are used for identifying knowledge-rich person in relevant fields. Among the many commonly used tools that you can see in this slide, a systematic framework developed based on the literature on a study done by U.S. National Research Council has proved to be very useful for this research, which is shown as the left side of the screen, which is the expert selection process. So it's very useful in the sense that it guides to the relevant organization and subject matter experts with the appropriate position and background methodically based on the criteria and a sub-criteria identified in the HTM model. Also, social network analysis was done to find the experts, and the sampling methods have been adopted based on finding the knowledge-rich person for this particular study. Different sampling techniques have been used. This part of the presentation shows a glimpse of the backgrounds of different experts who participated in different phases of the research and have great impact on ensuring the validity and reliability of the research. The next important part of the model development is validation. 24 experts participated in validating different components of the model. A consensus of 2/3 majority of the experts are set as a decision rule for accepting any element in the model. So as you can see from the graphs, that there are elements which has been accepted by expert, more than 2/3 majority of the experts, and there are elements which has been accepted by only 2/3 majority of the elements in the model. So there are different reasons which are actually discussed in the original report of this study, but some of the key reasons for lower percentage of experts favoring a component in the model are, like I explained at the beginning, consumer perspective and market perspective. Um, the other reason was grouping of components under different market attributes. So a lot of experts had the opinion to group different key components under different market attributes. Also, there were issues of terminologies, how the different key components should be named, or what should be the title of the market attributes. Other elements that are perceived to be more relevant than those in the model. So a lot of experts actually came up with other elements that they thought to be more relevant than those in the model. So these were some of the issues for which some of the key components have acceptance close to 2/3 majority of the experts. This section is a summary of the different elements in the model and are considered based on various studies in different sources on energy efficient technologies in residential buildings. So the next slide describes the technology cases that were compared using the model to find out the relative market diffusion potential. So the research applies the market diffusion potential assessment model to 3 technology cases. Now, the reason for choosing these technologies are, these are the cases suggested by experts in different organizations working on market transformation projects. Also, water heating is the second most energy consuming appliance after space heating in residential buildings, different performance efficiency of these devices, and also they use different fuels. So those are the reasons for choosing these 3 technology cases for the model. This slide shows the final model, which has been used for quantification and comparing technology cases. So the final model consists of 5 criteria, 5 market attributes, 20 key components or subcriteria, and 3 technology cases. The final model shows the relative weights of different components in the model after quantification by experts. A triangulation method is used to confirm the results from the study. The method is used to increase the confidence in findings through the confirmation of the result from 2 or more independent sources. So as part of the triangulation method, the final result has been shared with experts who find it to be a reflection of reality, with economic aspects being the greatest deterrent in diffusion, as well as they completely agree that the model correctly captures the influence of codes and standards and diffusion of energy efficient technologies. The result has also been cross-checked with findings in different literatures, which has been found to be consistent. Inconsistency and disagreement checks are 2 important tools for ensuring reliability of the data for the current research. So inconsistency is uncertainty in judgment by an expert. So inconsistent judgment would produce different weights of decision variables by different ranking methods. So this leads to wrong decision and concern about the effect, the credibility of the research method. So for the current research, inconsistency is so the cutoff point is the acceptable limit is 0.1. So for the current research, inconsistency is found to be within the accepted limit of 0.1 and less. Now, disagreement is the difference in experts' opinion, and it can give rise to uncertainty. So disagreement can arise due to different reasons, for example, ambiguity in question or representation in data or different backgrounds of experts. So the acceptable limit of disagreement is 0.1. So for the current study, disagreement is addressed by clustering to check if it's a natural outcome of expert diversity. So if the disagreement was more than 0.1, a cluster analysis was done. Disagreement was accepted when experts with similar background have common opinion. However, experts coming from different backgrounds having converging views, a Delphi method was adapted to understand and reach to a verified consensus as explained in Dr. Hussam's dissertation. The next slide is about the desirability curves, or it's also known as desirability functions, or utility or preference curves that helps to evaluate alternatives against different gradation of factors that affect the ultimate objective. The percentage diffusion over the range of units specified for each key element pertaining to a certain market attribute helps to find the diffusion potential of different technologies. For the desirability curves, the current research has included a tentative guideline on metrics for measuring each key component for greater applicability of the model. As shown for compatibility in different climate zone. So it's the horizontal axis shows that compatibility in one climate zone, in few climate zones, in some climate zones, but the experts were also provided what is meant by in one climate zone, and when we are considering in all climate zones, what kind of climate zones we are actually considering, which actually gives the model greater applicability for different energy efficiency devices and appliances. So as mentioned earlier, the three technology cases, the market diffusion potential model has been applied to 3 of the technology cases to compare their relative diffusion potential. So experts were sent a Qualtrics survey to assign the technologies in different categories based on the metrics for each key component. So as it is shown in this slide, ductless heat pump shows the highest relative diffusion potential among the 3 technology cases. So based on the relative weights of the key components, the low rating attributes for each technology cases are identified. So as you can see from this slide, the highest rating attributes and the lowest rating attributes are identified for each of the technology cases. Now, the reason for identifying these low rating attributes is to come up with some solutions so that the ratings could be increased in those components. This section shows the probable increase in market diffusion potential by appropriate actions that impacts the low rating components. The actions are suggested based on ongoing research and initiatives and advances in technologies for improving the diffusion and adaptability of these technologies. A scenario analysis is done, as mentioned earlier. So it's performed to visualize how change in relative strength of the market attributes created by product service values um, offered through the key components can impact the ranking of technology cases. So 5 different scenarios are developed by assigning maximum weight to a certain market attribute and assigning a weight of 0.1 to the other market attributes so that the total weight add up to 1. The next section shows the choice of technology cases based on the different scenarios and the uh, result of those analysis. So the key findings from this analysis, the scenario analysis, are identifying the market attributes where the technology is not performing well. For example, the ductless heat pump. So it has the highest market diffusion potential. So when we change the weight of different market attributes, but it can be seen that it stands the test of scenario analysis to delivery and infrastructure. Because when the relative weight of legal and institutional weight is increased, the total market diffusion potential decreased, which implies that there is room for improvement. Similarly, when a technology goes up in rank with respect to market diffusion potential, when the relative weight of a certain market attribute is increased, it means that it is performing well in that market attribute. For example, solar water heater market diffusion potential goes up by rank when the weight of legal attribute is increased. Now, what does that mean? The reason is that solar water heater exceeds performance efficiency, and code and standard has the highest weight in the model among the key components, which explains why it will have a higher MDP when the relative weight of that market attribute is increased. The other takeaway is even when the relative weight of a market attribute is increased, the market diffusion potential decreases from the base or reference case, which is the status quo. For example, in case of delivery and infrastructure, market diffusion for all the technology cases decreased when the relative weight of that particular market attribute has been increased. The reason is that it has the lowest relative weight among the attributes. So these are some of the findings that can be analyzed from scenario analysis. Finally, from the results and a discussion, it can be concluded that diffusion can be measured by market potential. It is possible to identify the important market attributes and key components that affect diffusion potential, and measuring relative diffusion potential of technologies in similar applications allow to take appropriate actions to increase diffusion. Next few slides discuss the contribution of the present research. So the theoretical contribution of the research can be described by incremental and revelatory contribution. The incremental contribution is what is added to the existing theory. Through this research, it is shown how the diffusion of energy efficient technologies can be measured from the market perspective, while in literature, most diffusion studies are done from consumer perspective. Also, the model has been able to combine the effect of drivers and barriers to contrasting determinants in diffusion, while in existing literature, either the impact of drivers or barriers are studied. Revelatory contribution is which has not been done before. The present study enriches the existing knowledge by finding ways to take measurable actions for increasing diffusion by identifying low rating attributes and taking actions to improve the market diffusion potential of those technologies. The second category of contribution is the practical contribution or utility of the model, how the model can be applied in organization or in the society. This section shows a schematic of the different steps in market transformation. Market transformation is a deliberate attempt to change the behavior of the market to increase the diffusion. As we can see from the figure that the market diffusion potential model can help in market transformation initiatives by scanning the environment and taking appropriate actions. Also, market diffusion potential has been identified as the most critical input for assessing, which is the next contribution. It also helps to assess emerging energy efficiency programs, as mentioned in Dr. Ibrahim Iskin's dissertation research. It can be seen from the diagram that captures the different stages of programmatic savings by utility. The market diffusion potential model can provide important information in the screening and the evaluation phase. The screening phase is the selection of the energy efficient technology based on technological potential, and the evaluation phase is selection of energy efficient technology based on market attributes. So the model market diffusion potential that has the information on technological potential and also on different market attributes can actually help in developing the programmatic savings. The last part of the presentation discusses the limitation and provides direction for future study. So a major part of the current study depends on experts to assess the elements that is hard to quantify otherwise. Despite careful planning, monitoring, the research was susceptible to the impact of inconsistency, disagreement, reliability, validity, and bias. So steps were taken to minimize these effects and improve the quality of the research. For reliability of data, inconsistency and disagreement are calculated as mentioned earlier, and appropriate actions are taken when these values exceed 0.1. For reliability of experts, strict selection criteria were followed based on research profile, publication, professional affiliation or experience. And the validity was ensured by content, construct, and criteria validity that was checked by experts' consensus. Bias, which is inevitable consequence involving human judgment in research study, as we consider that human cognitive skill is not perfect. So different sources of bias were identified. For example, response from expert or participants, or data collection technique, to mention a few. So the actions that were taken is called debiasing technique, which is used at different stages to minimize bias by prevention, which is at the beginning of the research process by adopting the correct instrument, data collection tool, and selecting the right experts. cure or minimizing bias during the research process, where during the process of the research was based on consensus. Finally, after the research was concluded, bias is minimized by careful analysis, interpretation, and elimination of bias where possible in the final output of the study. So careful, it was taken care of that the bias is minimized in the final study by adapting different tools. The other limitation is the application. As the model is developed for assessing diffusion potential for residential energy efficient technologies, it needs to be adapted for application in other technologies or in other sectors. So that is one of the other limitation of this study. Finally, the direction of future research. So the model can be applied for energy efficient technologies in commercial sectors or industrial use. The reason is that in commercial and industrial sectors, they have different objectives in saving energy in different setups. So the model could be applied for commercial and industrial use. Data envelope analysis can be used as a tool to analyze the data from the study and how the dominated alternatives can be moved to efficient frontier. The third study that would be interesting is for the key components considered in the model. Quite a few experts showed interest in having more insights in some of the key components that has been used in the model. For example, the in-depth analysis of impact of non-energy benefits, incentives, or labeling. So that could be another area where research can be done. Finally, sorry about that. So another interesting research could be identifying the key components that may have synergic effects on diffusion. For example, several studies found that the impact of incentive is far more when it's applied along with leveling compared to when it is adapted alone to increase the diffusion of energy efficient technologies. So it would be very interesting to find out which components have synergic impact on the diffusion, increasing the diffusion of energy efficient technologies. So that's all for my part. If you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Momtaj. Are there any questions? Any questions, anyone? Maybe you can unshare your slides, Momtaj.
Okay.
Okay. And you unshared them.
Gotten stuck.
I just have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, can I know why the acceptable limit for disagreement is only 0.1 and why can't it be more than 0.1? Are there any?
So that is the cutoff point which has been determined by the experts, and a logical reason is that when the disagreement is more, that means that the key components are the market attributes that are identified are not the one which are the most important. So that means that those are not the most important. There could be other elements that can affect the diffusion. So if there is disagreement, that means that the experts are not in consensus on the elements that has been identified in the model. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, if it is more than 0.1, what will means like, are there any
Yeah,
limitations?
that's what I have been showing that. So if the disagreement is more than 0.1, then we do a cluster analysis. So the cluster analysis actually identifies which experts, the different groups that has consensus, and then we actually go back to those experts and provide them the results and ask them that if they have something to tell about those results, do they want to change their opinion? And also we check the background of the experts. So if the experts are from different backgrounds, they usually have different opinion. So that's logical, that's acceptable. So if the disagreement is more than 0.1, we actually do the cluster analysis, and then we go back to the experts to have more insights on their opinion.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you.
very much, Momtaj. Thank you. So this actually brings us to the end of this seminar. So we thank you all attending. And if anybody wants to watch it again, it will be available on the Google Drive for the classes. And we will also post it on LinkedIn. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
Have a
much.
great
Bye, Dr.
day.
Lin.
Bye bye, Momtaj. Thank you.